Excellent. Good evening. My name is Ahmed Qureshi, and I'm the Executive Director of the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. And we are very pleased this evening to be at Mount Mary and also live online for a webinar on a shared vocation. We are going to be having questions and answers at a certain point after the presentation. For people online, we are asking that you please put your questions in the chat, although if that's not feasible, nor towards the end of the presentation, we may be able to take them live as well. As for those of you in the room, and there are probably a few more people in the room than there are online at the present time, we will take the questions as well, but in both formats, because we need to repeat the questions for each audience, we will have to repeat your question. And so when the time comes, whether you are in chat or whether you are in person in the room, we ask that you keep your comments and your questions short. Our presenter tonight is Dean Muller, the president of Wisconsin for Environmental Justice. Wisconsin for Environmental Justice is a group of concerned citizens dedicated to seeking redress for the destructive impacts of human-caused global warming on behalf of Wisconsin communities. They focus on public education and a relationship with the fossil fuel industry via a state lawsuit enabling them to work together to solve and heal environmental damage caused by industry using their funds. And so, Dean, very pleased to have you. Dean, by the way, is also a member of our Interfaith Green team as well, but we appreciate your bringing the expertise this evening and to the Interfaith Conference in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction and for the opportunity to be here. I certainly appreciate your hardiness in coming out on such a cold and rainy night. And I appreciate all the people that are online watching this as well. Oftentimes, when we have events like this, we have an acknowledgement. If you go to the next slide. Yeah. All right. It's not going. There. Okay. Okay. Good. Good. And rather than an acknowledgement, I wanted to read some quotes to you from probably the true conservationists, the environmentalists who preceded us on this land. It begins with Indians knew that life was equated with the earth and its resources, that America was a paradise. They could not comprehend why the intruders from the east were so determined to destroy all that was Indian as well as what was America itself. The white people were as thick and as numerous and aimless as grasshoppers, moving always in a hurry, but never seeming to get wherever place they were going to. And finally, I do not think you measure a civilization by how tall its concrete buildings are, but rather how well its peoples have learned to relate to the environment and to their fellow man. We're gonna be just smooth as a team here in just a minute. Okay, all right. First of all, I want to acknowledge, as it was mentioned a moment ago, the Interfaith Conference is certainly an organization that's been around a long time, almost 50 years. And more specifically, the Green Committee has been around that same amount of time. So this is not an early invention on the part of Interfaith. They've always had a real strong focus on the environment, what to do about, and also as it relates to social justice with respect to the environment. Some of the things that we've done in the past, we've shown a film called Cooked, which was about the significant heat wave that occurred in Chicago with a panel discussion after that. We're looking at such films that we might be showing, such as Dark Water, which is the DuPont litigation case, which is certainly could create a very robust discussion. And also we're looking at the rights of nature as another effort to achieve social justice with respect to the environment. So these are some of the things we continue to work on. And title of our program tonight is A Shared Vocation, translating collective faith into local climate power. And my wife and I were at the Jewish Museum today to see the violin exhibit, which is, I would certainly highly recommend it. And there was a quote there that kind of struck me. It reads as follows: "How wonderful it is when no one needs to wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." Anne Frank. What I'm going to attempt, well, this is another thing I wanted to point out, a book that was mentioned to me, which I have not read, but I'm certainly anxious to do so. Kate Marvel wrote a book about the various emotions that we have about environment, environmental change, etc. And as you can see there, it kind of runs the gamut from anger, despair, joy, etc. I was reading the paper this morning, and COP 30 is, what are they talking about at COP 30? They're talking more in terms of, we're going to exceed the 1.5 that is often mentioned, and we need to be looking more at how we're going to deal with a warmer climate and the implications of that and the cost of that. So that's one example. Another thing, sulfur being used to make batteries instead of the other raw materials that we need to dig out of the earth to make batteries. Batteries that have the capacity for 1,000 miles on a car. I mean, there's good news and bad news out there every single day, and we need to balance our approach to this in terms of how we begin to deal with it as we move forward. One of the things I'm going to attempt to weave together here is go to the next slide. Is corporate America, environment, and faith. I'm going to weave those three things together. So we're going to look at some survey information here. This is survey data that's put together by the Yale, and they survey the country extensively. They do it on a regular basis. They break the data down by individual states, and then they break it down by counties and cities. And what we're looking at is the data for Wisconsin here, the state of Wisconsin. So the response from people is global warming happening. And let me frame this a bit. The last election, big election in Wisconsin was what? The Supreme Court race, state Supreme Court race. I mean, the eyes of the world were on Wisconsin, right? And the race came out 55-44. And that was considered a landslide, a big deal, right? All right. So anything above 55 on this chart here, I think, is significant. All right. So we start off with global warming. Is it happening? Is it caused by humans? Is it affecting our weather? I mean, those are kind of almost Elmo questions. I mean, you don't need a scientist to answer that question. Elmo would have the right answer to that question. Now we go on to personal experience. That's much lower. So that's obviously something that people don't necessarily say they've experienced personally, the fallout from climate change. Does it harm future generations? A pretty big number there. And of course, both liberals and conservatives agree on that. They're concerned about the next generation. Now, maybe a conservative, quite honestly, might be only concerned about their kids, but but liberals tend to be concerned about just not my kids, but the kid next door and maybe the kid across the country too. So the next generation is a significant number. Then we go, has it harmed me personally? Again, very low, 38%. And of course, with the events that we've experienced in Wisconsin over the last, summer, the flood, the extensive heat, the Canadian wildfire smoke, et cetera, maybe that number will start to change. Transitioned to green by 2050. That's a really, good number, that people believe that should happen. The research number is the highest of all, 76%. The only one that relates to fossil fuel paying something is the carbon tax in terms of the survey data. In other words, if you put more carbon in as a company, as an entity, you pay more. Okay, that's how that works. And of course, the fossil fuel industry has publicly said that they support a carbon tax, but then they lobby like the dickens to make sure it never gets to a vote in Congress. Then the next one is local officials should act 50%, a little on the low side. Congress, 56%. 51% the governor. Citizens should act. That's you and me. We should do something about it. And, you know, one of the things that we're going to emphasize here is that, yes, we have lobbied the state of Wisconsin to pursue litigation you know, we've not given up on that, but they have not agreed to do that. But we're also, you know, the attitude sometimes is that the solution to this is somewhere far away. It's Congress, it's COPE 30 or something like that. Climate is a global problem, but we don't have global government, okay? So we need to be looking in terms of local government providing some impetus and solution for this. Then we look at the last two, which is it discussed, 34%, and does the media discuss it, 28%. So that is particularly disappointing. And of course, I appreciate the fact that for the next 45 minutes, we're going to talk about climate change, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to connect all the dots. Major climate event like floods, climate change, fossil fuel. They're all connected. And of course, the fossil fuel industry is trying to make sure we don't connect those dots. So that's one of the things that we're going to that needs to be focused on, and we need to change. Yeah, go on to the next slide. Now we're looking at opinions of corporations. Corporations' power for positive change, 87%. In other words, we view corporations as having that potential to bring about positive change in the world we live in. Do we trust corporations? Whoops, 20%. Not so good. Focus on profits, 80%. Focus on workers, 34%. Corporations have too much power, 72%. The next slide. The faith community. Climate change is happening, 90%. Very, very impressive number. Caused by humans, 60%. You know, I don't know quite what to make of that, to tell you the truth. Mentioned by leaders, 50%. And in other words, that's, you know, the people in the pulpit. And then mentioned once or twice, 25%. And this is often considered or called the climate silence in terms of the faith community. Now, yes, go on to the next slide. One of the things that in putting this together that struck me is the fact that, you know, we live in a country with very high, lofty ideals, right? And we don't want to forget what these ideals are, which are, you know, pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, consent of the governed. In other words, we run the show, and sometimes we wonder if that's the case. Government operates for the general welfare, for the benefit of all, and we are all, you know, equal. We should all have an equal shot. Now, that is, of course, the high bar, and, you know, it's probably we're operating down here, but we always need to strive to move it up and up and up. And the same thing can be true of faith ideals, inherent human dignity, justice, compassion, care for stewardship, care for creation, peace and forgiveness, and the golden rule. So when we look at, you know, I just, you know, threw faith leaders under the bus a little bit, but, you know, we look at the you know, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Martin Luther, I mean, all of them advance these types of themes, you know, from the standpoint that whether it was Buddha, you know, moving away from the caste system, or Muhammad in terms of building a society built on justice, you know, Martin Luther challenging the authority of the Catholic religion, et cetera. All of these, you know, embodies some level of, you know, thought and advancement for, you know, the common good, Other folks I could certainly cite. Pope Francis not only spoke about in his encyclicals about climate change and the need for caring for the earth, but he also spoke very much about that we needed to be bold and aggressive with respect to dealing with corporations, and that change needs to happen at that level. Let's go on to the next slide. So one of the things that's always struck me, and of course, the Our Father gets recited, I don't know, thousands of times, on a regular basis, et cetera. But there's a key line in there that I think we should dwell on, that thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So our charge in terms of this bar thing I talked about is we're supposed to create heaven this side of heaven, okay? That's the goal that we're working on here. It's not so much about your personal salvation. It's about working here to create that. And that, of course, is a large undertaking. So we want peace and justice to reign, quite simply. Or I often cite this. We were gathered around a holiday table. My oldest granddaughter, who was in grade school then, we're going around. We're supposed to, share something with the group in terms of what you were praying for. And she said, we should pray for all the people we know and all the people we don't know. Or you could say we should care about all the people we know and all the ones we don't know. So let's go on to the next one here. Yeah, let's go on to the next one. Yeah, the next one. Yeah, we're going to go by that one. Now, some of you know Father Mike. I knew him very well. He's a Capuchin priest. He's passed away. He was at St. Ben's in downtown Milwaukee. And one of the things that he spent a life working on was corporate engagement. He engaged the corporation. In other words, you would own the stock of a bad company and try to influence the actions of that company. That's the simple way of describing it, okay? And he worked with a number of religious groups, nuns, who had money to invest, and we would work on different projects. And this is one of the highlights of his career. And this is, obviously, you maybe recognize Joe Camel, right? And Joe Camel, what was the purpose of the Joe Camel ads? It was to sell smoking to kids, because Joe Camel was more recognizable to kids than Mickey Mouse. That's how powerful this approach, this marketing campaign was. And he set out to end this, and he was successful. The campaign went from 1988 to 1997, 9 years, and ultimately, I'd like to say I certainly helped him with that effort. The last thing Father Mike was able to accomplish was to get a scientist on the Exxon board. So I'm going through is some religious leaders here who have engaged the corporation. The next one. This, of course, is Reverend Sullivan, the Sullivan Principles, which was started in 1997. His effort was to put economic pressure on South Africa to end the apartheid system. And it was obviously successful. Nelson Mandela was elected, and that system was brought to an end. So this is an example of a faith leader, one person who decided what's going on in South Africa is not okay. And many, many institutions across the country ultimately adopted the principle and chose to boycott companies or stocks that were involved in that in that South African effort. And I was pleased to be able to work with Milwaukee County Pension Plan, which ultimately did divest from South Africa. And again, so large pension pools, large foundations, and so forth were active in that space. Another one I want to share with you, which is this is not a faith leader, Tom Peters. Early in my career, I was in business management. I managed companies, or was brought in to turn businesses around. In other words, businesses that weren't doing very well. And Dean was supposed to come back and come in and bring back the good old days, so to speak. And, where they were making a profit and the employees were happy and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, the point here is that he was a management guru back in the day, and he conducted an extensive study of companies on the S&P 500 that were profitable, were successful. And he wanted to figure out what the secret sauce was. And the secret sauce was this. They were companies and management that listened to their employees and they listened to their customers. Okay? And there's a kind of a modern day approach to this that I have not read, but it's leaders eat last. In other words, it's like you're in the cafeteria and the CEO is down there and he goes into the cafeteria last. All the other employees eat first. You take care of your employees and things will work out well. That kind of flies in the face of the survey information we were just looking at. Let's go on to the next one. I want to cite this one, which is Robert Bilott, who was an attorney who handled the DuPont chemical case. And this is the film Dark Waters is a film that tells the story about the action. This is a DuPont plant in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And it's a small town, and DuPont's factory is the town, okay? That's where all the jobs are. They have their name on the athletic fields, and et cetera, et cetera. But the problem is they're polluting a stream that goes to a farmer's cattle farm, and his cattle are dying. And eventually the farmer starts to they're dying, and he starts to accumulate evidence. He takes pictures, etc. And he goes to this attorney who happens to be working for a firm that represents chemical companies. And this person used to do his summer stints in Parkersburg, and he knew that. The farmer knew that. So that's why he approached him. He needed an attorney to represent him. And eventually he convinced the attorney to do that. And eventually the attorney convinces the firm that they should handle the case. And this is a quote that comes out because he battled this case for at least a decade or more. And finally, DuPont says, because many people in the community were experiencing cancer and other types of fallout from the chemicals that were polluting their environment, in the water, et cetera. And so there's at least 100 cases that had been developed and they were ready to go to court with. So he's called out of a birthday party, if you can envision this, and he goes out and his wife comes out and he says, what's going on? He says, well, I just got a phone call, and he says they're willing to I've got the clearance from the judge to handle these court cases. We're going to litigate them, but they want to litigate each and every one of them. So it's going to take forever for this litigation to take place. And this is the comment that he makes. The system is rigged. If you want us to believe it protects us, that's a lie. We protect us. We do. No one else, not the companies, not the scientists, not the government. It's us. And of course, the telling thing about this is that the thing that comes into play when we talk about the fossil fuel industry, I think you would understand and agree, let's go on to the next slide, that the regulatory entities, whether it's the EPA or the DNR, sometimes lag behind the technology, and they have a difficult time catching up because maybe people who go into government service, and I have great respect for people that go into government service, and of course they've been a bit maligned lately, but again, they're high skilled. They don't get paid as much as the people who work for the corporations. So sometimes they lag behind in terms of their ability to regulate what's going on in the industry. So what I want to do here is just quickly go through some science and some history with respect to fossil fuel. You see a graph here from 1850 up to the present. So 1850 and 1863, way down here, is when we plug the first hole in the ground and start to extract coal, gas, and oil. 1863. And of course, this period of time is called pre-industrial revolution. So down the side here is the temperatures that we talk about. It's 0, it's 1.5. And these are the years along the bottom, okay? Now, some points I want to make here, I could talk about this for a long time, but I'm not going to. Anyway, but my point is this, is that the extraction of fossil fuel from under the ground was put there 150 million years ago. That's when it was captured underneath the earth, and that's when the carbon was created. 100, so if we were drawing this to scale, it would probably go out to some ways, beyond Waukesha. Okay, that would be if we scaled it out, right? So it's a long, long time ago is the point I'm trying to make. So, and that is not an unlimited resource. And of course, you have to look at it from the standpoint that we reach here to the 1950s, 60s, whatever, and you see how this shoots up. That's when the Earth's temperatures start to increase. And it also, parallel to that, is how much CO2 we release into the environment. So the point I want to make here is that probably if I look out at this audience here and I look at the general ages, that's basically our lifetime. That's our legacy. That's our legacy in terms of the amount of energy we've used up. And of course, the point also is it begs the question, how much longer can this unsustainable source of energy last? And sometimes they say it's hard to estimate, but maybe 2060 is when it might. It may never be so depleted particularly, but it might be too difficult for us to access because of political considerations, or because of the access to it, or the quality of it, because the quality of this being extracted right now is not as good as it once was. So it requires more refining and so forth. And of course, that's the whole point of fracking, which is nothing more than just squeezing it out of the earth. So it's not as easy to attain as it was before. That's why we need the derricks further out in the deep sea. We need them in the Antarctica and all this sort of stuff. So the point is, we are on a trajectory here that is really very unsustainable. Let's go to the next slide. This is a family that is having their family reunion. All right. And of course, this is a very unusual family with respect to the fact that these are the descendants of John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller, was basically one of the first people to start plugging holes in the ground and extracting. And the first thing he extracted out was fuel that was used for kerosene. And then the stuff that they used for gasoline, he disposed of it, threw it away because it wasn't useful. Then the Model T comes along. Henry Ford, the freedom of the car, where you could go where you want to, when you want to, with who you want to. And of course, that was people who love railroads will swear that was the beginning, which it was, of passenger rail in this country. And that's when it started to show a significant decline as the automobile gained more favor. And of course, that's when the transition from horses to cars, et cetera, and all the push and pull that went along with that. And people didn't like, making that transition, but they did. So anyway, this family, it was the early 1900s when Standard Oil, the company that John D. Rockefeller founded, was forced to break up. Kind of a usual concept for a monopoly to be broken up in this day and age, right? But anyway, it was forced to be broken up, and it ultimately became Exxon. And this company, or this family rather, has basically at that point moved its wealth out of the fossil fuel industry and moved it into real estate. Rockefeller Center is a good example of one of their real estate investments. So this family has committed itself to exposing what Exxon is doing with respect to failing to notify and letting us know that what they knew about the damage that their product was doing. Because when we looked at that last graph back in the 70s is when they brought scientists into a department and developed a program and studied and did modeling to determine the impact that their product was going to have on the future. And they were astonishingly accurate. Some people ask me, what scientist do I believe? And I say I believe in James Black. James Black was a scientist that was hired by Exxon and to develop a department and to do this research to determine what impact their product would have on the environment. And of course, he took that information to the board of directors, to the leadership of Exxon, and they chose to ignore it and not do anything with it other than what we're seeing moving forward. Let's go on to the next slide. Down at the bottom here, yes, the planet got destroyed, but we for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for stockholders. And so the question often raises, brought up by people, excuse me, about who are we going to sue, and that those are the particular companies that are listed in the lawsuits that have already been filed: Exxon, Shell, Chevron, Total, and BP. And you see a look at their corporate profits. Let's go on to the next one. So in summary here, the fossil fuel industry has embarked on a campaign of denial, misinformation, and double talk. Such things as, well, the science is not clear. We don't know if it's really true that what we do is causing climate change. So again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, they have done everything they possibly can to make sure we don't connect the dots. Let's go on to the next slide. What we're talking about in terms of the type of litigation, which is fairly unique, and that is a tort claim. Tort claims comes from the name wrong or broken or whatever. It basically, it says that someone, if I came here and hit a pedestrian and they were paralyzed, that pedestrian have the right to sue me for damages. That's a tort claim. It has nothing to do with, in this particular case, with the fossil fuel litigation, anything that has nothing to do with the Clean Air Act or the EPA, or we're not suggesting that they violated any of those things. We're merely making the argument that they failed to notify, they created a public nuisance, consumer protection, fraud, they misrepresented things. Even some of the, I think Puerto Rico is even using the RICO or racketeering approach. In other words, broad-based conspiracy to deceive the public is the approach they're taking. So it's a very narrow, very focused type of litigation. And this type of litigation is handled in state courts. That's very significant in what we're trying to do here, because there's been a push-pull over, the first case was filed about 8 years ago. There's been this push-pull ever since. The fossil fuel industry would like this to be in federal courts. Then they can kind of muddy the waters with saying, well, we've had the Clean Air Act since Nixon and EPA since Nixon. What's the problem? No, or the fact that this is a global problem and you're trying to deal with it on the local level. Well, we are, but that's not the argument. The argument is the fact that you quite simply have damaged the public and failed to notify, et cetera, similar to the tobacco litigation, similar to the opioid litigation, where the pharmaceutical companies failed to tell us how addictive their product would be and the damage that it would do to people. So that is the argument. So it would be handled in state courts. And the U.S. Supreme Court the fossil fuel industry has appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, the one we all know and love, to remand it back to federal court. And the U.S. Supreme Court has been steadfast in saying no, tort claims belong in state court. So that's where the litigation is going to take place. So I mean, and the way we look at it is that we feel that, how should I say it? Our Supreme Court in Wisconsin is in a good place, okay? So that's as high as it would go in terms of appeal, all right? So that's an important distinction. The other thing I will say about this is key is the fact that we are urging smaller communities, larger communities, all across the state to pursue litigation. And oftentimes elected officials will say, we don't have money to pay attorneys to pursue litigation. And keep in mind that this litigation would be handled on a contingency basis. So the attorneys will not get paid unless they prevail in court. Okay, all right? Let's go on to the next slide. So these are some of the entities that have filed already. Good representation on the East Coast and West Coast. Imperial Beach is one I'm always fond of. It's a community of 25,000. Beach erosion was the reason for their claim. But you see, East Coast, West Coast representation. California filed last year, but they have a number of cities and counties in California that have filed. The state of Michigan is in the process of filing. Chicago filed last summer, and Minnesota filed 2 years ago. So again, all of these entities, big and small, all of them handle the cases by retaining an outside legal firm that handles the litigation on a contingency basis. Next slide. One of the things we did we commissioned a study, and I have a copy of it here. It's basically the data in here indicates that the cost of remediation for the state of Wisconsin would be $16 billion for the next 16 years. And these are some of the categories that were identified in that study. Storm drainage, as you can see, is a big number. Repair of roads and bridges, in other words, the heat. When you drive along, you go bump to bump to bump. Those are the seams that, kind of, in the potholes. And the excessive heat and cold does a lot of damage to our roads. And actually, the study focused on a lot of things with respect to the fact that if you did the proper repair and remediation of roads and fortify them properly, then you would alleviate a lot of the problems into the future. But that's basically asking government to do it, so to speak, the right way, the correct way, and they hardly have the money to fill the potholes right now. So but that was something the focus of the study. Tree canopy ranks right up there. In other words, plant more trees, takes CO2 out of the environment, provides shade, less air conditioning costs. Air conditioning of buildings that are not air conditioned right now. Public buildings that need to be air conditioned that are not, because the temperatures are rising. Bridges that need to be fortified and repaired because of floods and damages. I did ask them to include health issues in it, not just all infrastructure. So Lyme's disease ranks very high because of the increase in tick population. Coastal protection, we have a lot of lakes. Lake Michigan, interior lakes that need to be fortified, et cetera. The break walls need to be increased in size. Jones Island, somewhat threatened. Get a big storm off the lake. Jones Island be a big deal if we lost that, right? That's where all of our you-know-what goes. The next one is West Nile virus. Rural flooding, excuse me. Net energy is buildings that either need to be changed so that they can change in such a way that they become net zero. Cooling centers, and then pediatric asthma. Let's go on to the next one. Point I will also make on that slide: the $16 billion that we identified in the study, 70% of those costs fall on cities and counties. Which makes sense because they're the ones that are responsible for many of the things that are on that list, the infrastructure and all that sort of thing, okay? The study enables us to break this down by individual cities and counties and villages. There's 72 counties. We can do it for each of the 72 counties. We can do it for the 160 cities. There's 1,500 villages. I'm talking about the tiny little ones at 5,000 or 500 or 1,000 in population, whatever. We can show that breakdown with the data that we have. So here's an example of what that looks like for Waukesha County. Cooling centers, what that would cost. Net energy buildings, air conditioning, tree canopy, storm drainage, rural flooding, bridge stabilization, road maintenance, and their total climate cost is this number. And we compare that to what their annual budget is. So we're trying to make an impression on elected officials that this is an important hit to their operations, and certainly something that they need to address. We also point out what the fossil fuel industry, what their executives got compensated, which of course in some cases for smaller villages, the fossil fuel execs got paid in 1 year could certainly pay for remediation for a lot of small villages and towns and even some counties that are smaller. I've plugged in here the COVID payments that were received. Point being is that Waukesha, you received COVID payments to deal with that downturn in the market, et cetera. And these are categories where my thinking is these are categories you got money from somewhere else where you didn't have to ask your local taxpayers for it, right? And of course, that's the other argument that we're using for local officials is the fact that getting it from the fossil fuel industry, you don't need to ask the taxpayers for it because taxpayers are getting tapped out. And believe me, I am not an anti-tax person. I think FDR said it best. He said the taxes are what we pay for civilized society or something like that. And of course, I pay my taxes. I do it, but the strain that taxpayers are under is growing, and the budgetary constraints that cities and counties are facing are significant. They're dealing with the fiscal cliff. I mean, we're seeing, months on end, particularly in the fall of every year, where they're scratching their heads trying to figure out how they're going to pay the bills and how they're going to come up with a budget. And more to the point, in terms of a social justice issue, what are the things that get cut? Bus routes, hours at libraries. The city of Milwaukee is talking about an eviction program that they're going to think about cutting. They're even taking a hard look at sustainability departments at the county and city level. I mean, these are decisions that shouldn't, or the fire department in Milwaukee wanted $12 million for new equipment, and they put 2 in the budget, and I guess they decided on 8 or something like that. So these are real social justice issues in terms of what government needs to do to respond. And I guess, let me use the example of the big flood that occurred in Milwaukee. We wonder about whether insurance is going to pay for any of that, right? Maybe yes, maybe no. FEMA getting some of it, the rest of it, yes, no. But for sure, there's one entity that's not going to pay a dime, and that's the fossil fuel industry. And they need to, because they're the cause of the problem. Let's go on to the next slide. So what I did here was look at some of the other political entities that you might have an interest in, set up the same way. I just used the bottom line numbers. Milwaukee County, big numbers there, obviously. Let me get my bearings here. The city of Milwaukee, 1.4 is their budget. Again, it's certainly $500,000 in terms of remediation costs. Wauwatosa, where we're at right now, a budget of, got to do a better job on this layout of this slide. Their budget is a 96, and their climate cost is 26. Glendale, excuse me, I'm doing this the wrong way. Their budget is 96, and their climate remediation is 51. Glendale is not a pretty picture. Again, they've got a lot of river running through their budget versus their climate costs. Picked up the fossil. West Allis here is another example. Their budget of 45 and their climate cost of 76, and the city of Waukesha down here, again, very big number with respect to climate costs. And one of the things that I should mention here is that I've had a lot of really people's opinions I really value who've looked at this study, and that says there's nothing much to quibble about in here. It's very, very, very well documented in terms of the cost. Next slide. So these are just some of the climate events that we're talking about here in Wisconsin, which I think you can probably all relate to from the standpoint that, the increases in insurance costs, the lack of snow for the Berkey, the tornadoes in February, which never happened before. I'm sure you probably heard of the number of bad air days we had because of the Canadian wildfires, and then the number of heat days we had, which was more than the previous year. The Beloit, that whole area, worst air quality in the country. So Wisconsin is by no means immune from what's going on climate-wise, which, begs the question of what we looked at on the survey information is people not feeling that this affects them. So the point here is keeping these things in mind. Let's go on to the next slide. One of the things I wanted to talk about here, because when we look at this as an organization, when we looked at how are we going to convince sometimes very conservative local officials that there is an impact, and being forthright about it, I think most of the people in this room can believe that, there's a moral question here, moral corruption in terms of the fossil fuel industry. So the moral issue, the moral argument, I think is pretty clear, but that may not respond or resonate well with a conservative office holder. On the other hand, we are emphasizing to a large extent, or at least as much as possible, the fiscal nature or the cost and the impact that it has on us as citizens in terms of climate change, and also the services that we forego because the local governments don't have the money to pay for some of these things, the number of school referendums, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here was an attempt on my part to kind of equate it to the individual household. The fact that climate disasters from 2000 to 2020, $100 billion is what it costs the state of Wisconsin. The fact that we import $14 billion worth of fossil fuel into our state every year because we don't have any of our own. The cost study I just mentioned of 16.7 billion, and then the subsidy that we pay to the fossil fuel industry. And I won't get into that, but we do pay a significant subsidy as taxpayers to the fossil fuel industry. Added all that up and took it times the number of households in the state of Wisconsin, which is $53,000. So I guess it's, set your mind to thinking in terms of what households could do with an extra $35,000. $53,000, excuse me. Next slide. Compensation for fossil fuel executives and profits, 2.6 trillion in revenue, 100 billion in profits, and the fossil fuel executives being paid annually $37 million versus the frontline worker who's working, the fracking field or whatever, getting 55,000. So certainly flies in the face of what we would call something who's an entity that's being corporately responsible. The definition of corporate responsibility is as follows: a company produces a product or service that is beneficial to society, and they produce that product or service without exploiting workers or the environment. That's the definition of a socially responsible company. Go on to the next one. So things we can do as individuals: enjoy nature, talk about it, eat less meat. I mean, you can come up with any number of things we can all do. Buy locally, reuse, recycle, buy less plastic. In other words, polyester clothing, when you put it in and wash it, creates microfibers, which goes into the water and it goes into the fish and it goes into our bodies. I mean, it's in plastic water bottles. Plastic, it goes into our, it's 99% of what goes into plastics comes from fossil fuel. The fossil fuel industry has been very adept at expanding its footprint in terms of, it is obviously in transportation, manufacturing, and as a source of energy, but has also branched out into plastics in a significant way, and also into agribusiness. It's huge. And of course, it's from my business background, I have to say, it's you try to establish a market share, right? They have more than done that. That's for sure. They are at the center of our universe in terms of what we eat, what we wear, how we get from one place to another. They dominate our world. Let's go on to the next one. Things you can do collectively. We do have petitions up here that I wish you'd take a look at and sign. It's always great to have support of more and more individuals. We're certainly trying to convince elected officials that we have the credible support from the public, people like you. Donations are always welcome. Like I mentioned a little bit ago, when you have social justice over here and you have money over here, combine the two, things can happen. So we always welcome donations and money. We are an organization that's been at this about 2.5 years. Talking to elected officials, we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail. And if there's other groups that you're members of that you think they would be interested in supporting us, we have over 100 organizations that have agreed to support us, and they run the gamut from social justice groups to environmental groups to faith groups to et cetera, et cetera. So any and all, we take the approach that everybody in Wisconsin is an environmentalist, right? And I don't care if you hunt ducks or you want to fish or you want to go birding or whatever. It all stems from the environment and to preserving that. And talking to a conservative individual, sometimes you have to meet them where they are. You have to ask them the question of, what do you think about the weather? Do you think it's changing? And, a farmer told me once, if you take that approach and ask a farmer, he'll talk to you all day long. If you talk to him about climate change, walk away. Okay? So you need to meet people where they are. And I'll send this invitation out to you. Thanksgiving is coming. And I'm making myself available. I can be, that uncle that gets invited to Thanksgiving who comes with an abundance of conspiracy theories, right? And he won't shut up. And why does he get invited? Because he's family, right? You got to invite him. So I'll come in the place of that person, but I'll talk about climate and climate change and the impact that it's having on our world. So we can all talk about it and make it a conversation and build the awareness. Because you remember the survey information, it doesn't get talked about enough. When has climate been a campaign issue in our world? It hasn't. It hasn't. What was the last presidential election? It was about cost, inflation, trip to the grocery store, et cetera, et cetera. Immigration and climate change affects all of those things, right? A trip to the grocery store, no question about it. The food costs, transportation costs, immigration, the fact that countries to the south of us, in terms of the instability that has been created by the fossil fuel industry, causes that immigration, et cetera. All these things are connected and they revolve around climate, and we need to have that conversation. Go on to the next slide. One thing I will ask you to do, you all are represented by elected officials, either at the county level, city level, village, whatever. And maybe you don't know who that person is. You need to find out who that person is. What I would ask you to do is a simple thing. Sit at your computer and send them an email and CC me and say, I heard Dean talking about this, yada, yada, whatever. And I think you should talk to him because, he's got ideas on how you could get some more money without having to tax the taxpayers or however you want to frame it. So just, do that, and it's a door opener. What does that mean for me? That means I don't have to call that elected official a half a dozen times to get him to pick up the phone and talk to me, because he doesn't know anything about Wisconsin for Environmental Justice, and he doesn't know Dean. So that's the thing that you're doing, is making that entree, which is very, very helpful. Let's go on to the next one. All right, so I'm kind of summarizing here: engage, boycott, and legal action. So all of these things can help influence corporations. They need to be influenced. They need to be encouraged, pushed, pressured to do the right thing. And so we've talked about them in terms of engagement. What Father Michael did, what Reverend Sullivan did, and legal action is another avenue, and rights of nature is another example of this, and other types of litigation. Ours is more specific. We are specifically targeting the fossil fuel industry. And I've indicated to you who we would be pursuing litigation against. And more specifically, we're not doing it specifically. We're urging local government officials to do this. As I mentioned, climate is a global problem, but we don't have global government. What we do have is local government, and they can be a catalyst for bringing about this change. So with that, I will close it and ask for any questions you may have or thoughts. I'm open to that. You got any there?
So one question online real quick is, why less green grass?
Oh, the fossil fuel industry really loves green grass. The chemicals that we use on it, are often products of the fossil fuel industry, and not to mention the lawnmowers and all the gas that they consume, et cetera, to do that. And it's just this, yeah, and then you can add to that the lack, or the root system of green grass goes down that much. And if you do a natural thing, and of course the curses of your neighborhoods, the the root systems goes down that far and holds the soil, and less runoff and less problems with flooding, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, and it's great for habitat. Leave the leaves lay. I know there's a lot of piling of leaves going on, but leave them lay. I mean, they're good habitat for wildlife. And yeah. Other questions? Yes.
You mentioned something in the last slide about boycotts, and I'm just wondering if you have any stories about any boycotts which have been attempted in order to encourage corporations to change their practices to be more environmentally conscious.
I think the South African boycott was one that received a lot of attention, and it was broad-based and so forth. I think that, and the question had to do with boycotts currently. And I think that is, having spent 39 years in the investment business, that is an ongoing thing, because investors, both in institutional and in individual, are looking for portfolios that screen out what they consider to be bad stocks, that they do not morally want to invest their money in, okay? And that's an ongoing thing, and it just grows and grows and grows. There's no question about it. And all of the Wall Street firms, I worked at Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, and E.F. Hutton. All of them have a sustainability or green or socially conscious or ESG type department that focuses and makes those kind of investments available to the public because the public wants them. Many people individually and also institutions want to invest their money in that fashion, and they do so by avoiding certain stocks that they do not want to invest in. And also, it has gotten more sophisticated than that, and they want to invest in companies that have a sustainable business model. They produce a product that is beneficial to society. They produce a product that is produced in a sustainable way, that they pay their employees well. And that's what the ESG is all about. It's environmental, it's governance, how well is the company run, and so it's very robust and active type of investment activity that continues to grow and grow. And I realize, that there have been some pushbacks of late. Won't go and name names or whatever, but it's still, very much a popular type of thing with investors. No question about it. Other questions? Yes, Mike. Yes, the question was, what's the status of the lawsuit for Milwaukee County? We have had a number of conversations with Milwaukee County about doing this, doing litigation. They did pass a resolution about a year and a half ago that urged the state of Wisconsin to pursue litigation against the fossil fuel industry, which is a good step. And also the city of Milwaukee did the same thing, urging the state to do that. But we also indicated to both of them they were going to come back and ask them to sue the fossil fuel industry. And those conversations are ongoing, and I would characterize them as being very productive. And they have also indicated to me that they would like broader participation. And of course, we've had conversations with Madison and Dane County as well, with West Dallas, with Glendale. We're in the process of conversations with Oshkosh, also with tribal nations, that they would participate in this, because there are two tribes that already have filed lawsuits. Just had an interesting conversation with an alderman from La Crosse, thought that they would be willing to do this. Who am I forgetting about? But yeah, I mean, it's the response has been good, and it's just a painstaking process to get the word out that this type of litigation exists, that local governments can do it. They can, and it comes down to what? It comes down to the political will to do it, because it's not going to cost the particular governmental entity anything to do it in terms of legal cost, and it could be really a nice ongoing source of revenue. For example, the tobacco settlement was $4 billion for the state of Wisconsin. Unfortunately, the state of Wisconsin settled for and to be paid out over 15 years. But the state of Wisconsin, in an act of irresponsibleness, agreed to a one-time payment of $1 billion, which they used to cover a government or a budget shortfall in that particular year and to give the taxpayers a refund. Now, we would still be receiving payments from from the tobacco settlement to this day, and whatever. The opioid litigation was $750 million for the state of Wisconsin. That's being paid out over 15 years. So again, long-term, revenue stream. Nice for a government. And the same would be true of a settlement like this. It won't be paid out all at once. And of course, the challenge of our organization is to pursue litigation, have it be successful, get the settlements paid out, and then make sure the money gets spent for what it was supposed to be spent for. And I think you stand a better chance of that if it goes directly to local governments rather than have it filtered to the state of Wisconsin and the legislature there, et cetera. So if it goes directly to a municipality or a county, whatever, it still needs to be monitored and make sure they spend it for the right things. And that in the opioid settlement I think we're seeing some good things there in terms of treatment centers that are being developed, educational programs to clarify for people the dangers of opioid and the addictions that it can cause. So I think that money is going to local governments and being spent in a proper way and having good results. Yes.
Of the money that is received from some of this litigation, okay, just talking about that amount of money. I think you said that it's going back into programs, enable environmental justice, correct?
If you could repeat the question.
Right.
Funding, any money available from the litigation for people who might want to engage in entrepreneurship related to environmental programs that would further environmental justice, but i.e. grants, just funding, ongoing funding.
As I understand your question is if there's been some actual litigation where that money has been made available. Right. And the answer to that in terms of this, no. The only case, the city of Honolulu is in pretrial. The first litigation was Emerald Beach, which was 8 years ago, and so it's been a fairly short time period that this litigation has been underway. So it's in tobacco was 25 years, opioid was maybe 15 years. So it's moving along at a pretty good pace, and Honolulu is in pretrial. Pretrial means that they're sharing. Each side is sharing their evidence with one another prior to going into the courtroom. So we'll have to wait and see how soon that happens. So none of them, the cases have occurred. Now, I was thinking of another response to your question with respect to, I can't remember what it was now. Yeah, go ahead. Well, yeah, that it's potentially in terms of fossil fuel running out 2060. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah,
How are we to access any of the results, or my words here, but how are we supposed to be able to do the things that need to be done toward that end without the funding that's going to come from?
Well, your question has to do with how are we going to approach this thing with the urgency that's required to generate the money that's going to be needed. And I can only say people of faith are called, we have a high bar That's, I often quote Reverend William Barber II, who said that churches are not a social club. They are where you deal with your individual spirituality. No, it's there's a requirement for membership, and that membership requirement is action in the areas of social justice. That's what we need to be focused on, and there's a great deal of urgency. I can talk about that more specifically. I was having a conversation with the head of the sustainability department at Milwaukee County, and let me think of the numbers here. They want to be Milwaukee County wants to be carbon neutral, or excuse me, reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, and I think zero by 2050. Right. And he said to me, he said, if we don't get the funding that we need, we will go beyond the point of no return. We will not be able to accomplish any of these goals. One of the things that's talked about in those sustainability meetings, one of the key components of it is mass transit. We need more mass transit. And what we're doing with mass transit, we're cutting bus lines. That's just one example of the things that need to happen at the county level. I mean, the budgets are really, really strained. There's no question about it. I mean, if you want to look at it in terms of you don't like potholes, or if if that's your issue, which there's plenty of potholes to bump around in and throughout the city, but it's other social service type things and programs that can't be funded properly that need to be funded. There's no question about that. So there's all kinds of issues that we can talk about that have a fiscal component to it. So other questions? Tom?
From a litigation standpoint, is there evidence that's not available, not there yet, that would help, tip it, make it more effective, more viable? Are there efforts underway to get it? I mean, there's a lot of scientific research, some of it being cut back by the federal government now, but what are the impediments to having successful legislation now?
You mean successful litigation? Successful litigation. My experience thus far in working with this, yeah, the question was, what are the roadblocks, impediments to moving this forward in terms of litigation? Is I think the essence of your question. Okay, I think there's two things. I would always give elected officials the benefit of the doubt. I would not say that any of them are absolutely completely opposed to this. No, not at all. I think they are. They're just not aware that it is an option for them to pursue. And of course, one of the key ways of making that connection is, say, opioid litigation. 71 of the 72 counties in Wisconsin participated and are receiving revenue because of that litigation. They sued the pharmaceutical companies, and the revenue comes to their particular county. And those counties did not have the money to deal with the opioid problem that they do have in their county. That would have been another budget item that they would have had to rob from Peter to pay Paul. And so that I think that is the biggest challenge here, is to get the word out that this is an option. And that's the thing we struggle with as an upstart, wet behind the ears organization, in terms of getting that message out there via social media, via media, regular media, et cetera, so that they know that's available to them. And I don't go into many rooms and say that I'm president of Wisconsin for Environmental Justice where they say, "Oh, I heard about you." But we're trying to change that. Anyway. Yes, go ahead.
Example, you talked about going from the horse to the car. Well, in urban areas, that's not true at all. We went from the streetcar to private automobile. And in local government, it's individual preventing city governments from adopting alternatives to car transportation. Like you're talking about money to repair the roads. We have too much roads in urban areas, especially. We have too many cars. Have a reaction to that?
Oh, I agree with everything you said, that there's too many cars. That's, I mean, just, I live in, no, no, it's absolutely right. So your questions for the rest of the audience, for the listening audience, was having to do with transportation, mass transit versus cars, and why is there such an emphasis on cars versus mass transit in the world we live in? And I, am I responding to your question properly, or that's because I only have 45 minutes, and that's basically it. But no, I could talk for a long time about transportation. Yeah, right. No, I agree. I agree. The issue of transportation is a huge one. There's no question about that. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, you look at that graph that I showed you, where the zoomed up. I mean, in 1950s, we built the freeway system in this country. I mean, and that was just, I mean, that spawned the sprawl, right, to the burgs, and people could drive to the burgs, and they come, et cetera. They could flee, and they fled in groves, and et cetera, and uh, the uh, the we just kind of pushed mass transit to the side, which was a huge solution for us, that's for sure. And I mean, I'm somewhat befuddled, et cetera, about our lack of mass transit in this country and also in Milwaukee. We have the hop. I mean, what other major city has such a lack of light rail transportation other than Milwaukee? I mean, you go to Minneapolis, I mean, it's just appalling, to be quite honest. But anyway, and again, I don't mean to minimize your question. I just did not have enough time. What I'd really like to do is to the horses to cars. It's somewhat the same debate we're having right now about gas combustion cars to electric cars, and the insanity that goes around with respect to that. And we like to talk about range and security and all that sort of stuff. How many what's the mileage limit for your electric car? That's irrelevant. I have enough mileage on my cars to do whatever I want to do in terms of traveling around, which is 25 to 30 miles. And by the way, the capacity is 300 miles, so it's not an issue. I take it home every night, plug it in, and it's charged up. I'm ready to go the next day. That's not an issue. Every EV owner already has a charging station. It's in their garage. They plug it in and they charge up their car. Do we need more charging stations? Absolutely, absolutely. It makes it just more convenient. That's the transition that we're talking about. The same thing that took place with horses to cars. We didn't like manure on city streets anymore. That's why the horse eventually went away. And the Model T came, and you cranked it, and maybe you broke your arm, and then electric starters. So the technology improved, and it replaced the old technology, which in this case, we're looking at technologies that's cleaner, cheaper, et cetera. We seem to, at this point in this country, standing in the way of new technology, which as a country, as a civilization, we have never done. We have never done. We've always prided ourselves as consumers of saying we can get from point A to point B and burn less of it. But now, if we can burn zero, it's not a good idea. I don't know. I'm befuddled at that. Go ahead.
Just 1 second here. We're running up on 7:45 right
Okay.
now. So we will take a couple more
Sure.
questions, but I want the people to know in the room and online, there'll be an opportunity afterwards, and your email has been posted.
Yep.
As well, and you'll be happy to answer questions offline as well. So we'll take a couple more questions, and I think our co-chair, Raren Goomble, had her hand up.
Go ahead.
Litigating for how much money do they actually have to pay? Would that hurt them? Would that actually hurt the industry?
At first, the question was, how much money are we asking or litigating for, and would that hurt the fossil fuel industry? I can't, let me answer this question. Well, the $16 billion, it's not like we go in there with an invoice. Here's the way it works. First of all, this would be a trial with a jury of our peers. People like you and me would be on a jury to decide guilt or innocence. So it wouldn't be the lobbyists that would decide. That's a refreshing thought, right? It would be people like you and me. They would decide who's the guilt or innocence, and they would decide on the monetary settlement as well. Now, $16 billion, by the way, is really a very conservative, lowball estimate in terms of the cost. It would probably be, for the state of Wisconsin, a lot more than that. It would probably be a combination of tobacco, opioids, et cetera. It would be a huge amount of money. Now, can they afford to pay that? I don't know. That is ultimately something that they were going to have to reconcile and figure out. That's why they are very traumatized at the scope and the pace with which this litigation is proceeding. So that is certainly a concern to them, and it should be. What was the other thing I was going to say about that? I can't remember what it is, but yeah, I think you get the essence of what it is. I mean, it would be determined by a jury. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think one of the things that comes to mind here is how much money would it take to get us to where we need to be in terms of environmental cleanup or whatever. I think the number of, huge. It'd be a huge number, no question about it. If we're talking about not only remediation, but also moving in the direction of a robust green energy rollout, which is what we need to foster. And of course, I mentioned the subsidy that the fossil fuel industry enjoys, which there's no sense to that, because it made sense way back when, because they would argue that they had to drill a well and they didn't know if there was oil down there, and they needed to recoup their cost by, we didn't find any there. We're going to drill another one over here. We found it here. So that was where the subsidy, and it continues to grow and is still on the books. Does that mean that new industries need to be subsidized? We subsidized a railroad system in this country, and subsidies for green energy, et cetera, that needs to happen too. It needs to be a partnership between government and private enterprise to make it grow robustly to the level it needs to be. There's no question about that. Any other questions? You can go ahead. Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming out on a cold and rainy night. Very much appreciated. Warms my heart.